Tonight, we check in with the poor man's Greg Gutfeld, George Clooney. Remember, he wrote a scathing op-ed prior to the election calling on Joe Biden to drop out? And this week, he took to CNN, the only place he's seen less than in his own movies, to gloat. God, I hope God, I hope Jake Tapper doesn't plant his lips firmly on George's puckered ass.
George Clooney, the debonair icon of Hollywood, seemingly thought he could gracefully moonwalk into the complex arena of American politics. Perhaps with a perfectly brewed espresso in one hand and an air of effortless sophistication in the other. Instead, he found himself unceremoniously tag-teamed by the unlikely duo of Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly. In a brutal media takedown that had all the subtlety and finesse of a WrestleMania main event specifically designed for washed-up, out-of-touch celebrities. One minute, he was serenely preaching his political gospel from the comfort of his Lake Como mansion. The next, he was being verbally drop-kicked back to the shores of celebrity irrelevance. What exactly did George Clooney say or do to trigger this savage, two-pronged media assault? Stick around, because this is the captivating story of Hollywood arrogance colliding head-on with its unceremonious and very public match. Clooney, it's safe to say, didn't even see it coming.
Brave.
It was a civic duty. When I saw people on my side of the street not telling the truth, I thought that was time to...
Are people still mad at you for that?
Some people, sure.
Wow, if that's Clooney with makeup. Imagine what he looks like without it, huh?
What's the matter, George? One might cheekily inquire. The Hollywood role's getting a little hard to come by as you age and get decidedly more smug and self-congratulatory? It's a fair question, especially when an actor of Clooney's stature chooses to cap off an appearance by lecturing the entire audience on the intricacies of how journalism ought to be properly conducted. Speaking with the gravitas of a modern-day Edward R. Murrow, he warned of the ongoing, perilous struggle for truth and integrity in the media, pontificating on the ever-present potential for the media to be manipulated and insidiously used for propaganda. George Clooney, it appeared, had looked out upon the national mood, witnessed the swirling chaos, the rampant inflation, the spectacle of ordinary people arguing vehemently over skyrocketing gas prices as if it were the Great Depression reincarnated, and arrived at a profound conclusion. You know what this struggling country desperately needs? More unsolicited lectures from out-of-touch multimillionaires.
I remember Clooney's the same guy who held a star-studded fundraiser for Joe weeks before he dropped out and only called for him to quit after his disastrous debate. Clooney ignored concerns over Biden's age for years, only to magically come to the conclusion that he was demented when America finally saw what Clooney had been hiding. That's the problem with Dems. They're obedient shills for awful people, then pretend otherwise once voters see that they're full of. But remember, we were pointing out Joe's dementia before it was cool. We knew Biden was the worst president ever, which probably means Jimmy Carter died a happy man.
Nothing, it seems, screams national unity, quite like a man swathed in a $20,000 tuxedo, leisurely sipping on a freshly pulled espresso in his palatial Lake Como estate, earnestly telling hardworking Americans how they should vote, all while his dedicated gardener meticulously trims the perfectly manicured hedges in the picturesque background. Brave, one might sarcastically mutter. Clooney himself described his intervention as a civic duty, proclaiming, "When I saw people on my side of the street not telling the truth, I thought that was time to speak out." When asked if people were still mad at him for his pronouncements, he conceded with a hint of martyrdom, "Some people, sure." One almost expected a single, perfectly formed tear to roll down his impeccably chiseled cheek. Wow, an observer might note. If that's Clooney with makeup, imagine what he looks like without it, huh?
What's the matter, George? Are the Hollywood roles getting a little hard to come by as you age and get decidedly more smug and self-congratulatory? I'm just asking. And chooses to finish this show by lecturing the audience on how journalism ought to be done. Speaking as Edward R. Murrow, he warns about the ongoing struggle for truth and integrity in the media. Truth and integrity. About the potential for the media to be manipulated and used for propaganda.
Yes, George Clooney, The man who once donned the cowl of Batman and, in the eyes of many a comic book aficionado, nearly torpedoed the entire franchise, had officially, and with considerable fanfare, attempted to level up from mere actor to revered political savior. Because naturally, when the guy who engaged in on-screen banter with a talking fox says it's high time for America to engage in some serious soul-searching and profound reflection, you are, of course, expected to listen intently. Or at least, that's what his undoubtedly well-paid PR team, and perhaps Clooney himself, genuinely thought would happen. Instead, what transpired was a glorious, almost cinematic, slow-motion car crash of elite self-importance colliding with the unyielding force of sledgehammer sarcasm from none other than Greg Gutfeld, and a laser-guided, intellectually devastating torpedo launched with pinpoint accuracy by Megyn Kelly.
So if you're doing that, and we don't tell people what to think when we show that montage at the end, for instance.
The Hollywood script that George Clooney likely imagined for himself probably featured him framed like a modern-day philosopher king, his resonant voice echoing majestically over a stirring soundtrack of patriotic music, inspiring profound change and national unity with his sage pronouncements. The reality, however, was starkly, almost comically, different. Greg Gutfeld, upon witnessing Clooney's political posturing, reportedly laughed so hard he nearly gave himself an abdominal workout. And Megyn Kelly, with her characteristic blend of legalistic precision and no-nonsense skepticism, proceeded to dismantle his carefully constructed moral compass with the finesse of a seasoned surgeon wielding a surprisingly effective jackhammer.
New nuggets are breaking. Tara Palmieri, who's got her own Substack and podcast now, she's been on the show, she got a copy and released a couple of the nuggets, and so did The Guardian. But hers was a really interesting nugget. And she's apparently in this book, they reveal that George Clooney saw Morning Joe one day, right after his op-ed, and Mika Brzezinski was suggesting that Barack Obama was behind the George Clooney op-ed. That was basically making Clooney seem like Obama's puppet.
Now, it's crucial to remember, as Kelly was quick to point out, that this is the very same George Clooney who held a lavish, star-studded fundraiser for Joe Biden mere weeks before Biden's notably disastrous debate performance, a performance that sent shockwaves of concern through the Democratic Party. Clooney, it appeared, only called for Biden to quit after this public stumble, after the writing was already emblazoned on the political wall. For years, Clooney had conveniently ignored, or at least publicly downplayed, the mounting concerns over Biden's age and cognitive fitness, only to magically come to the startling conclusion that he was, in fact, demented when America and the world finally saw with their own eyes what Clooney and other insiders had allegedly been hiding, or at least artfully obscuring, for an extended period. That's the problem with Dems, one commentator might argue. They're often obedient shills for awful people, then pretend otherwise once voters see that they're full of it. But as many conservative voices were quick to remind everyone, we were pointing out Joe's dementia before it was cool. Greg Gutfeld, predictably, saw Clooney's grand political performance and reacted with all the deference and respect that a disdainful cat might show a goldfish attempting to lecture it on the complex fluid dynamics of its own water cycle. Clooney's pronouncements, Gutfeld implied, were essentially the high-calorie, low-nutrient junk food version of political thought, artfully stuffed with expensive polysyllabic words, yet absolutely, almost defiantly, empty of any discernible logic or practical substance. Gutfeld tore into Clooney's arguments with the savage glee he usually reserves for a particularly bloated Oscars monologue that has grievously overstayed its welcome by a good 30 minutes.
Here he is going on, this is to 60 last night, about, you mentioned his op-ed in the New York Times on Joe Biden, and why he did it. Such a selfless, brave act, Ben. Here he was.
I was raised to tell the truth. I had seen the president up close for this fundraiser, and I was surprised. And so I feel as if there was a lot of profiles in cowardice in my party through all of that.
Oh, wow.
And I was not proud of that. And I also believed I had to tell the truth.
That fundraiser where he saw Biden almost falling off the stage, where Obama came out to grab him, was June 15th. The debate was June 27th. It wasn't until July 10th, almost a month after he attended the fundraiser with him, that George Clooney finally wrote that op-ed after it became clear that Joe Biden wasn't stepping down. He's such a liar.
For Greg, Clooney's hypocrisy wasn't just obvious. It was so blatant, so ostentatious. It was practically a form of performance art. Imagine, Gutfeld seemed to suggest, the sheer audacity of flying halfway across the world in a carbon-belching private jet to deliver an earnest, heartfelt speech about the urgent, existential threat of climate change. And doing so with the unwavering sincerity of someone who genuinely, unironically, believes that owning a picturesque vineyard automatically grants you profound, invaluable insight into the complex dynamics of global geopolitical affairs. According to Gutfeld's sharply defined worldview, George Clooney is the undisputed prototype of the Malibu Messiah complex. That very special, uniquely Hollywood condition where celebrities tragically mistake the sound of applause for the weight of legitimate credentials. Their box office returns for a popular mandate. Gutfeld didn't even need to delve deep into the minutiae of policy details to make his point. He simply and devastatingly painted a vivid picture of a man who, by all appearances, spends more time meticulously moisturizing his famous face than most actual politicians spend reading essential legislative documents. Suddenly, inexplicably, deciding that he is the chosen oracle of modern democracy, the one voice capable of guiding the nation through troubled times. In Gutfeld's words, though not directly quoted verbatim, Clooney was basically the insufferable guy at a dinner party who hasn't picked up a serious book since 1998, but nevertheless insists on confidently and at great length telling everyone else precisely how the government should and should not function.
He waited a long time, but he should have the guts to maybe say that his friends in Hollywood, like John Voight or Mel Gibson or Sylvester Stallone, who shared a risk, might have been right on a few things. He's starring in Glengarry Glen Ross, am I right?
No, it's Good Night and Good Luck.
Oh,
Sorry,
never mind.
my fault.
I was going to say, I mean, they have tremendous respect for David Mamet. David Mamet is one of the most conservative people. So maybe instead of just sitting in silence, you should actually speak up for some of the people who shared the risk in Hollywood.
The takedown was both hilariously cutting and brutally effective. Gutfeld, with his trademark wit, compared Clooney's approach to fixing complex societal problems to someone attempting to repair a leaky household pipe armed only with a bottle of expensive French cologne. Smells nice, Gutfeld might have quipped, but does absolutely, positively nothing to stop the water. He asserted that Clooney's understanding of Middle America, of the concerns and aspirations of ordinary working-class people, was about as accurate, as grounded in reality, as a 5-star Yelp review written by someone who has never, in their entire privileged life, ventured outside the gilded cage of Beverly Hills. And let's not forget, in the grand, time-honored tradition of a thorough Gutfeld roasting, he subtly, yet pointedly, reminded his audience that George Clooney once starred in a film where his primary co-star was, in fact, a talking goat. If that, Gutfeld seemed to imply with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, doesn't scream foreign policy experience, then what? Pray tell? Does? While Greg Gutfeld was out there, metaphorically speaking, flame-throwing with unbridled sarcasm and comedic fury, Megyn Kelly was meticulously setting up a sterile, almost clinical, surgical suite of irrefutable logic, hard facts, and undeniably eyebrow-raising reality checks. Where Gutfeld brought the unrestrained humor and the populist outrage, Kelly brought the incisive courtroom demeanor and the laser-focused intellectual rigor. And she didn't just clap back with a witty retort. She delivered a full, comprehensive closing argument, a legalistic dismantling so thorough it was worthy of a nationally televised trial, complete with damning exhibits and cross-examination. She began her dissection by calmly, almost dispassionately, laying out George Clooney's pattern of behavior. A consistent display of elite virtue signaling, emanating from a man whose primary remunerative skill set involves memorizing lines written by others and, on occasion, pretending to cry convincingly on cue. She highlighted the inherent contradictions in his public persona. A man who delivers impassioned speeches about the existential threat of climate change, yet comfortably zooms around the globe in gas-guzzling private jets and luxury yachts that cost more than most people's homes. Check. A self-proclaimed crusader for equality and social justice, who nevertheless resides in a sprawling, opulent mansion guarded by more security personnel than a royal palace. Double check. She didn't just call out the hypocrisy. She illuminated it, spotlighted it, and presented it to her audience like a meticulously staged theatrical production, leaving no room for misinterpretation.
Party. I bet there's one person in particular he thinks is spectacular.
There's one person in particular I think is spectacular. There are a few who I think is levitating above that is Wes Moore. I like him a lot. I think he could be someone we could all join in behind. We have to find somebody rather soon. It's our job now to put together a proper team to stand up, because we're right now polling very poorly.
I love that. Levitating above, as opposed to sinking to the bottom, like his last movie.
According to Megyn Kelly, George Clooney doesn't just consistently miss the point. In many ways, he is the point. A walking, talking, impeccably dressed billboard for precisely how out of touch, how disconnected from the concerns of ordinary people Hollywood elites have become. It's not that Clooney's expressed opinions are particularly new or original, she argued. It's that they are, for the most part, simply recycled, pre-approved progressive talking points, artfully dipped in a veneer of caviar-induced sophistication, and invariably served with a generous, heaping side of moral smugness. Kelly then went after something even deeper, something more fundamental. The pervasive, often unexamined illusion that fame automatically equates to wisdom. That celebrity somehow bestows upon an individual a profound understanding of complex societal issues. Just because someone's face is instantly recognizable, just because they've won a few awards for pretending to be other people, doesn't mean their opinions on economics, foreign policy, or the intricacies of democratic governance carry any more inherent weight than a particularly articulate raccoon's Twitter thread. Kelly pointedly, and repeatedly, questioned why major news networks continue to give figures like George Clooney such prominent platforms to speak on the future of democracy, as if he somehow co-authored the Constitution in between takes on a movie set, perhaps during a leisurely espresso break. But perhaps the most lethal, most devastating part of Megyn Kelly's meticulously constructed takedown was her steadfast, almost defiant refusal to be dazzled, to be starstruck by the sheer wattage of Clooney's celebrity. Where others see George Clooney and instinctively hear the swelling strains of violins, a cinematic soundtrack to his perceived gravitas, Kelly, with her unblinking gaze and sharp legal mind, sees a highly effective PR machine, a well-oiled apparatus skillfully trying to pass off warmed-over, generic celebrity pabulum as profound, insightful statesmanship. She saw the carefully crafted script, she recognized the impeccably tailored costume, and she, quite simply, wasn't buying the performance. She highlighted the almost comical delay in his op-ed criticizing Biden, pointing out that the fundraiser where he allegedly saw Biden almost falling off the stage was on June 15th. The infamous debate was June 27th. Yet Clooney's brave, truth-telling op-ed didn't appear until July 10th, long after it was clear Biden wasn't stepping down. He's such a liar, one might conclude from Kelly's presentation of the facts.
But in this new world of common sense, what is he aligned with? Is he might have way more in common with Trump than he is with the progressives. The question is, does he have the bravery to say that? I have no idea where he stands on the border, sanctuary cities, or trans extremism. How does he feel about the fires in LA? Is he happy with how it was handled by Mayor What's-Her-Face and Governor who's his name? You know,
while George Clooney floated serenely on his self-made cloud of perceived sophistication and moral superiority, Megyn Kelly remained firmly, resolutely on the ground, armed with her scalpel of truth and an unwavering commitment to exposing hypocrisy. She didn't attack him as a person, not directly. Rather, she systematically and with chilling effectiveness dismantled the idea of Clooney as savior. This strange, persistent belief that charisma, a good jawline, and a history of playing heroic characters somehow qualify an individual to fix the Byzantine complexities of geopolitical chaos. And here's the best, most telling part. The public, by and large, ate it up. They consumed the Gutfeld and Kelly critiques like it was freshly popped popcorn at a summer blockbuster movie, the kind Clooney himself might star in. Gutfeld's razor-sharp zingers went instantly viral, ricocheting across social media platforms. Memes of Clooney, artfully photoshopped onto cheesy motivational posters with captions like, "Speak less, flex less," exploded in popularity. Twitter, predictably, turned into a digital battlefield, with Clooney's beleaguered defenders, armed perhaps with little more than their cherished cappuccino cups and a sense of wounded indignation, clashing fiercely with a growing army of critics swinging heavy hammers of common sense and lived experience. Megyn Kelly's takedown, meanwhile, with its more measured analytical approach, got quoted, clipped, and replayed on practically every show, every podcast, every platform that dares to challenge the often unquestioned authority of celebrity pronouncements. Her words weren't just commentary. They were clarifying, crystallizing. They were the kind of incisive, deeply resonant response that makes people stop mid-scroll, pause their endless doom scrolling, and collectively go, "Wait a minute." Finally, someone actually said it. Megyn Kelly didn't swagger into the room swinging wildly, fists flying. No, she strolled in with the calm, unshakable demeanor of a seasoned surgeon, coolly and methodically rolling up her sleeves as if to say, with a hint of icy amusement, "Oh, George, you really want to do this? Are you quite sure?" While Greg Gutfeld had already, with characteristic comedic brutality, body-slammed Clooney into the punchline graveyard, Megyn pulled out her intellectual scalpel and began to meticulously, almost dispassionately, carve the actor's flimsy arguments into neat, easily digestible, bite-sized pieces of public embarrassment.
I think, this Johnny-come-lately, I was raised to be honest, is a bunch of BS. All right? Obama told him to do it. He sees himself as this extremely important person. I think he's an arrogant, condescending, smug individual who thinks that, he should be able to tell people in America, and the Democrat Party certainly, what they should and shouldn't do. This president, Joe Biden, is one of the most disastrous presidents that we've had in American history.
In this new, emerging world of common sense, a world increasingly skeptical of elite pronouncements, where does George Clooney, with his carefully cultivated image and progressive bona fides, actually align? He might have way more in common with Trump than he does with the progressives, Kelly mused, posing a provocative and, for many, startling question. The question is, does he have the bravery to say that? She then proceeded to list a litany of pressing issues: the border crisis, sanctuary cities, trans extremism, the handling of wildfires in LA, pointedly asking where Clooney stood, highlighting his conspicuous silence on topics that didn't fit neatly into his preferred narrative. On her podcast, where well-earned smirks often come gift-wrapped in meticulously researched citations, Kelly took Clooney's vague political musings, held them up to the harsh, unforgiving light of scrutiny like a piece of suspicious, potentially counterfeit meat, and proceeded to fact-check the ever-loving espresso out of them. "Let me get this straight," she began, her voice laced with that signature, almost glacial tone that seamlessly blends lawyerly precision with a hint of barely concealed incredulity. "You think you're bravely standing up for democracy from the idyllic shores of Lake Como, with your feet luxuriating in a heated infinity pool, and your Wi-Fi router presumably set to a custom network named Superiority Complex?" She then dove headfirst into the substance, or lack thereof, of Clooney's comments about media disinformation, the perceived threats to democracy, and his utterly original, groundbreaking take that conservative voices are, somehow, inherently dangerous. Yeah, Megyn Kelly had receipts for that. She coolly pulled up statistics on the plummeting levels of trust in mainstream media. Spoiler alert, it's nosediving faster than George Clooney's last unfortunate box office return, and gently, yet firmly, reminded her listeners that systematically silencing dissent, demonizing opposing viewpoints, isn't democracy. It's just an echo chamber, albeit one with significantly better lighting and a more appealing catering budget. And then came the look. That signature, almost legendary. "Are you actually genuinely serious right now?" Expression that Megyn Kelly masterfully deploys when someone unwittingly stumbles into a serious debate armed with little more than good intentions, a handful of cliches, and absolutely zero grasp of logic. If you've ever witnessed someone earnestly trying to explain the intricacies of cryptocurrency to their utterly bewildered golden retriever, that's precisely the vibe. Only this time, the confused, tail-wagging pup in question was George Clooney, earnestly, almost desperately, wagging his metaphorical tail while pontificating on complex global affairs with all the unearned authority of a man who once, memorably, played a talking fox in a children's movie.
Julia Roberts, who outed herself not only as a leftist, which we knew, but as somebody who, and by the way, she's also a husband stealer. She stole the husband that she has right now in a reported affair. So, okay, maybe don't be the voice of the ad in which we talk about women betraying their husbands, because in the leftist view, marriages are not about honesty and talking about one's differences and agreeing to disagree on certain dicey issues, but they're about lying. And they believe this so strongly, you put it in an ad. And her pal, George Clooney, who did something similar for another ad, same. You got Joe Biden out. How'd it work out for you? How'd that go? Maybe you should have said something a little earlier.
But wait, it got even better. Or perhaps, for Clooney, significantly worse. Cue the hypocrisy highlight reel, playing on a loop for all to see. George Clooney, Megyn Kelly, stated with surgical, almost gleeful precision, lectures the world with grave sincerity about the existential threat of climate change, all while blithely flying around the globe on private jets so frequently, so extravagantly, they probably qualify for some sort of frequent flyer therapy program. She didn't stop there. She mercilessly called out how he passionately rallies for unity and understanding in his eloquent speeches. But only, it seems, if that unity doesn't happen to include conservatives, libertarians, truckers, or heaven forbid, anyone who doesn't possess a SAG card and a current subscription to The Atlantic. And the pièce de résistance, the cherry on top of this sundae of hypocrisy, his endless, often sanctimonious monologues about the paramount importance of democracy, which, rather conveniently, seem to be oddly timed for when his preferred political side isn't currently holding the steering wheel of power. As Megyn Kelly so succinctly, so devastatingly put it, it's democracy when they win. It's fascism when they don't. Apparently, in George Clooney's carefully curated worldview, ballots only truly count, are only truly legitimate, when George Clooney happens to like the outcome. Ouch. Somewhere in a lavish villa in Italy, a perfectly brewed cappuccino spontaneously, tragically, curdled. But Megyn Kelly wasn't just there to roast. She came to dismantle, to deconstruct, to expose. The deeper she went, the more brutal, the more unavoidable, the reality became for anyone still clinging to the increasingly tattered illusion that George Clooney was some sort of profound political sage, a beacon of wisdom in a sea of ignorance, instead of, perhaps, just a very famous, very charming, tuxedo-clad teleprompter with exceptionally good cheekbones. She then dropped the hammer on the broader, more systemic issue. Why does Hollywood as an institution keep trying to cast itself with such unwavering self-belief as America's collective conscience? Why are major news networks consistently, almost reflexively, giving actors whose primary expertise lies in pretending to be other people serious, extended airtime to discuss complex global policy, as if starring in a movie like Syriana is somehow equivalent to crafting or even understanding actual foreign policy? And there it was, the undeniable, almost palpable death blow to George Clooney's entire carefully constructed persona as a beacon of profound political insight. Megyn Kelly pointed out, with chilling clarity, that this wasn't genuine leadership. It was merely theater, a well-rehearsed performance of grandstanding, elegantly delivered in Armani. It wasn't true civic duty. It was, she implied, little more than narcissism, artfully disguised as activism, meticulously curated for applause and validation at exclusive cocktail parties where everyone already agrees with you. And no one has ever, in all likelihood, actually seen the inside of a Walmart. She unflinchingly compared Clooney's political posturing to Hollywood's recent and increasingly tiresome trend of celebrities cosplaying as revolutionaries, as brave truth-tellers speaking truth to power. They're not risking anything, she asserted, her voice devoid of an Gutfeldian smirk but heavy with conviction. They're not standing on the actual front lines. They're tweeting from their yachts and delivering impassioned speeches at award shows while the orchestra politely, then insistently, plays them off for being too self-righteous, too preachy, too long-winded.
So if you're doing that, and we don't tell people what to think when we show that montage at the end, for instance.
By the end of Megyn Kelly's systematic dismantling, you could almost feel a twinge of sorry for George Clooney. Almost. Megyn didn't shout. She didn't rant. She didn't resort to ad hominem attacks. She simply, and with devastating effectiveness, opened the door to unvarnished reality and calmly, almost politely, let George Clooney trip spectacularly over his own tangled web of logic, or lack thereof, on the way in. It was a quiet execution, surgical in its precision, devastating in its impact. And for those who enjoy watching intellectual arrogance get vaporized by a relentless barrage of facts, delivered in a tone so icy it could reliably refrigerate a week's worth of groceries, undeniably beautiful. And somewhere, probably behind a gleaming $1 million espresso machine, George Clooney likely blinked at the unexpected and undoubtedly unwelcome backlash, genuinely wondering what on earth went wrong, blissfully unaware that Megyn Kelly had just unceremoniously turned his lofty political ambitions into a widely circulated and highly instructive cautionary tale for every actor, every celebrity, who foolishly confuses applause for wisdom, a red carpet for a legitimate political platform.
Here he is going on, this is to 60 last night, about, you mentioned his op-ed in the New York Times on Joe Biden, and why he did it, such a selfless, brave act, Ben. Here he was.
I was raised to tell the truth. I had seen the president up close for this fundraiser, and I was surprised. And so I feel as if there was a lot of profiles in cowardice in my party through all of that.
Oh, wow.
And I was not proud of that. And I also believed I had to tell the truth.
That fundraiser where he saw Biden almost falling off the stage, where Obama came out to grab him, was June 15th. The debate was June 27th. It wasn't until July 10th, almost a month after he attended the fundraiser with him, that George Clooney finally wrote that op-ed after it became clear that Joe Biden wasn't stepping down. He's such a liar.
So now we've got George Clooney, the would-be philosopher king, the self-appointed savior of American democracy, left floating precariously in a vast, isolating sea of self-importance, desperately paddling with a comically undersized golden oar, wondering how his meticulously curated image, his carefully constructed persona, got so thoroughly, so publicly, turned into a running punchline by two media personalities who have, in all likelihood, never once stepped foot on a glamorous red carpet. It's as if he confidently tried to play a complex game of chess armed only with a charming smile, while one opponent showed up with a sledgehammer and the other with a meticulously prepared legal brief. And somehow he still genuinely thought he had a fighting chance. But this isn't just about George Clooney. Oh no. This is about the bigger, more insidious disease arguably infecting much of Hollywood. The deeply ingrained, often unquestioned belief that fame is a magical shortcut to credibility, that celebrity somehow bestows enlightenment. It's about the pervasive assumption among certain celebrities that because they are adored, idolized on screen, they must therefore be enlightened, insightful, off-screen. That the thunderous applause for their acting prowess somehow translates into widespread agreement with their often poorly informed, yet confidently expressed ideas. Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly didn't just roast George Clooney. They roasted the endless, self-congratulatory cycle of awards shows where millionaires endlessly pat themselves on the back for convincingly pretending to be poor, oppressed, or otherwise marginalized people. What George Clooney unwittingly walked into was a cleverly disguised trap, a snare of his own making. He thought, perhaps naively, that he'd be met with deference, with respect, with hushed admiration for his bravery and insight. Instead, he got demolished. Greg Gutfeld saw right through the glamorous facade and, with characteristic glee, lit it on fire. Megyn Kelly, with her sharp legal mind, peeled back the carefully constructed curtain and found, to no one's real surprise, just a regular guy with opinions no more refined, no more insightful, than your average local Uber driver. The only discernible difference? The Uber driver probably has significantly more real-world experience and a much better grasp of what it actually costs to fill up a gas tank. And in the aftermath of this media maelstrom, the message from the public, from the viewers, from the countless individuals who consume these takedowns was clear, unambiguous, and undeniably resonant. America is tired. Not just tired of George Clooney specifically, but tired, profoundly exhausted, from the endless barrage of celebrity sermons, the relentless sanctimony, the out-of-touch pronouncements emanating from the rarefied air of what many perceive as limousine liberalism. George Clooney, in this particular cultural moment, simply became the unfortunate yet perfectly emblematic poster child for everything people are, collectively and increasingly, rolling their eyes at. The ostentatious luxury, the unsolicited lectures, the profound disconnect from the everyday realities of ordinary citizens. Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly didn't need to yell. They didn't need to organize a boycott. They didn't need to storm a red carpet. They simply used something far more effective, far more potent: wit, logic, and a keen, almost unerring sense of when someone is demonstrably, undeniably full of it. George Clooney offered them a spotlight. They, in turn, brought a mirror, and the reflection, for Clooney and for Hollywood at large, was anything but flattering. So, the next time a celebrity, no matter how beloved, no matter how acclaimed, steps up to the podium to earnestly tell America how to think, how to vote, how to live, they might want to pause, take a deep breath, and perhaps look cautiously both ways. Because Greg Gutfeld might be lurking nearby, armed with a devastating punchline, and Megyn Kelly might be silently, patiently, waiting in the wings, meticulously preparing a closing argument that ends with chilling finality, something like this. And that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is precisely why we don't take serious policy advice from a man who once, memorably and perhaps ill-advisedly, wrestled a CGI goat. Roll credits. But not the glossy, self-congratulatory Hollywood kind. The real ones. The kind where regular people, for once, finally get the last satisfying word.